Jerry West is widely regarded as one of the greatest basketball players to ever play the game. He was among the 5 best players of his own time and was a champion with the 1972 Lakers. Unfortunately, for many, it seems that Jerry West was much greater than he was better, and that the common belief I have seen from people is that he was great for his time, but would not be great in today's NBA. For this video, I aim to challenge that belief and provide evidence that West would likely still be a legendary basketball player in today's NBA. But first, like and subscribe as it will help the algorithm out. So last month, Jerry West passed away at the age of 86. With his death, that leaves Oscar Robertson, Bob Cousy, and Bob Pettit as the only MVP or Finals MVP from that era that dominated in the 50s and 60s that is still alive. As a longtime fan of the sport who likes to be seen as a walking encyclopedia of NBA history, I have always tried to give them their dues as pioneers of the sport and as legitimately great basketball players. But I've met so many around my age and younger that see them as plumbers and mailmen, not the Twitch streamers and TikTokers that dominate today's NBA. It's frustrating because I know these guys were great athletes, highly skilled, and did so in a time where distractions like video games and social media did not exist, where generational wealth was not guaranteed, and microplastics didn't kill men's testosterone count. If you want to argue that there's a much larger talent pool today, and that training and nutrition has improved, sure, but let's not ignore the benefits they had that today's talent pool are lacking in. Let's also not ignore that West today would have the added benefits of improved training and nutrition. So anyway, how would Jerry West fare in today's game? Probably better than you would think. Let's first start out with what he did in his own time and what he brought to the table. In his 14-year career with the Lakers, Jerry West made it to 10 NBA Finals and won one of them. He was a 12-time member of the All-NBA team and a 5-time member of the All-Defense team, which became a thing only in his last 5 seasons. He led the league in scoring in 1970, finished second in 2 other seasons, and finished second in MVP voting 4 times. He averaged 27 points, 6 boards, and 7 dimes on 47%. Excellent numbers then, and excellent numbers now. The only active players that match or exceed all 4 of those today are LeBron and Luka. One is established as a Pantheon caliber legend. The other has a chance to retire as a Pantheon caliber legend. On one hand, his numbers could be argued as inflated because he averaged around 39 minutes per game and played on teams that averaged around 120 possessions per game. Today's players rarely exceed 35 minutes and teams rarely exceed 100 possessions. Jerry West had far more chances to produce than today's players do. On the other hand, you could argue that his numbers are deflated because the game was more physical, the paint was more clogged, and drilling moves were much more strict in those days. Observe this basic crossover that West attempted in an early 70s game that was called a travel. And obviously, if that was a travel back then a step back would have been illegal as well. There was also no 3-ball to give Jerry West an additional point off a make, which meant that this legendary 60-footer was a 2 and not a 3. Mind you, the Lakers lost this game, and they lost the series 3-4. Could West have won a title in 1970 had the 3-ball existed back then? Some food for thought. That 3-ball's changed everything. Most teams that dominate today are not built to dominate under 60s era rules, and vice versa. There were also less teams when West played, which means talent was more condensed. The talent pool argument would be more valid if in both eras the total teams remained the same. But in the NBA that Jerry West played in, there were generally only 9 teams, not 30 teams like today. This means that West faced his toughest opponents far more often than today's players do. Let's take Jokic as an example today. His biggest positional opponent is Joel Embiid, who he only faces twice a year, actually only once a year because Embiid is afraid to play at Denver. His other top matchups are against the Twin Towers in Minnesota, the Celtics, Giannis and the Bucks, the Thunder, and AD in the Lakers. In total, that's roughly 16 games a year, or about 1/5 of the regular season. For Jerry West throughout his career, his top opponents were Robinson's teams, the Celtics, and Wilt's teams. Teams face each other about 10 times throughout the season, so for those 3 teams alone, that is 30 out of about 80 that involved having to face the best of the best, about twice as many. When you factor all of the above, his numbers are neither inflated or deflated in the context of today's NBA. If you want to be more accurate, they're deflated from a per minute and per possession standpoint. We do not have West's full per 100 possession numbers, but here are his raw numbers and his per 36 numbers and how they compare to today's top combo guards from age 22 to age 35. I picked these players because they all could and have played point guard and shooting guard, which are the positions Jerry West spent most of his NBA career playing. I also want to emphasize that the modern group gets to deal with much lighter officiating, gets to deal with a more open paint and less physicality, and gets to play in NBA where they face each other much less than West had to face his top peers. They also had better rims. West played with hard rims, better lighting, and better conditions in regards to the floor and shoes worn. Go try playing in Chuck Taylor's in an old college gym built in the 50s. Don't do a basic crossover or step back or it's a travel, and see how much harder it is. Let's factor all that in when discussing West in his era. Now let's look at his physical tools and skill set. Jerry West was listed at 6'3" and 175 pounds, which were his rookie measurements. Today's players are usually measured without shoes, like in West's time, so we don't even need to adjust, but going back to the previous players, here's how his height stacks up to theirs. Now let's look at wingspan. The only player from that group that is both taller and have a longer wingspan than West are SGA, Luka, and Harden. Here are pictures of West next to Steph, Wade, and Kobe. Keep in mind that with older people, they lose about an inch. And here's a view of him discussing his height.
Well, I'm really not 6'2". I'm 6'4.5", and I have about a 40-inch sleeve length. So, and I was an athlete. I could run. Basketball's a game of anticipation, quickness, how your mind is wired.
So I've not even mentioned that Jerry West was an explosive athlete, which isn't what one thinks of when they think of Harden, Luka, or even SGA. In other words, among today's top combo guards, none of them are bigger, longer, and more athletic than Jerry West. What about skill level? Doesn't matter how big or how high someone can jump if their skill level is lacking. Here's where it gets to more speculative territory. West played in a much different NBA where the 3-ball wasn't a thing, where players had to be more fundamentally sound to avoid turnovers, and where the strategy was to play through your bigs and to always push the pace. It is almost unrecognizable to today's game, but we can still watch film and at least have a good idea of how he would play today. The problem is, we really can't, because a lot of what today's players utilize to maximize their impact was flat out illegal or non-existent in West's time. What we can do is look at free throw percentage, perhaps the most reliable and objective stat for error comparisons. And even that's missing some context, like the hard rims and poor lining of the past. Jerry West was a career 81% free throw shooter. In his 4th season, he made over 80% for the first time, and in his final 11 seasons, he made 83.3% of his free throws, peaking at 87.8% in 1967. Unfortunately, we can only speculate on his three-point shooting, but West was known in his time for taking deep-range baskets at a time when those were still worth the same as a layup or a close midi. I don't see a reason why he would not have adapted fine to shooting more threes. We know West was damn near automatic from mid-range. As an undersized player in an era where the strategy was to take as many close shots as possible, he had to excel as a shooter to score as much as he did to go along with his elite athleticism. Now what about his handles? Again, West played an era where dribbling rules were far more strict than today, but West had a very fundamentally sound game. If your game is fundamentally sound, like a Tim Duncan, a Kawhi Leonard, or a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, you don't need fancy dribbling moves. Now those three are taller than West, but none of them are as athletic in West, and West was still probably around 6'4" with a 6'9" wingspan. He would not need fancy dribbles to be elite in today's game with those measurements. Now there is one red flag with West, and that is that he could not dribble and shoot with his left hand. Observe. Well, so much for that. While it is true that West clearly favored his right hand for both shooting and dribbling, I have seen enough out of West to believe that this gets blown out of proportion. How much of this could be attributed simply to the strict dribbling rules of his time? So in conclusion, Jerry West had elite size and athleticism for a guard, had a fundamentally sound game, was a two-way menace, and was an elite shooter. He might not have been Steph Curry as a shooter, but he was probably the closest there's ever been to Steph Curry with a 40-inch vertical. West played in an era where perimeter players were somewhat nerfed and 7-footers ruled. West played in an era where the talent pool wasn't as deep as now, but there were far less teams, so that is not as relevant as people make it out to be. Would he be the best player of this current gen or the previous gen? No, I don't think he's better than LeBron, who headlines the previous era, or Jokic and Giannis, who headline this current era. But I do think he's up there with anyone else. In his own time, he was not better than Wilt or Russell, but he was as good as anyone else. So in a game more tailor-made towards his strength, with the perks of lenient ball handling rules and more accessible training and development, I think he will be about the same now, among the best of his generation. So that's my conclusion. What about you guys? How do you think the logo would fare today? Let me know in the comments down below, and be sure to follow my social media accounts. Cyber out.